Good morning everybody. Today we will discuss gastroesophageal reflux disease, the pathophysiology and diagnosis. As you all know, the gastroesophageal reflux is a normal phenomena that occurs whenever the acidic content from the stomach goes into esophagus. Whenever this phenomena affects a person and cause heartburn and regurgitation occurring more than twice a week, then it is called gastroesophageal reflux disease. It is a chronic disease which has relapsing features and affects quality of life. If you look at the worldwide prevalence of the disease, then it affects about 13% of the people from the various studies, and if we talk about India, then 22% of the population is sometimes in their life is affected by this reflux. The disease is more common in older people because as the person ages, the lower esophageal sphincter relaxes, and again in men because of smoking and other addictions and obesity, they are the main factors. We will discuss in this presentation, in this class, basically about the pathophysiology and the diagnosis. So the pathophysiology, the main thing is the anti-reflux barrier. So first of all, we should know about what things prevent reflux. So if you look at this diagram, then there is a lower esophageal sphincter which is made up by various types of muscles, and this is the main thing that has a pressure of 10 to 30 mm Hg and prevents the reflux. This sphincter is also supported by this crural diaphragm, as well as there is a sharp angle of joining of esophagus with the stomach. So whenever we swallow something, this lower esophageal sphincter acts as a one-way valve which allow the food and liquid to enter into the stomach but does not allow the regression. So the main role is placed by this reflux barrier, and in addition to that barrier, there are mucosal defenses in the esophagus, as well as there are mechanisms to clear acid from esophagus, whatever refluxes back into the stomach. In addition to the esophageal mechanism and the barrier mechanism, in the stomach also we have increased gastric emptying, which prevents the acid to move into the esophagus. So when it comes to the pathophysiology, whenever the functioning of this mechanical barrier is affected, whatever the acidic contents are there into the stomach, they go into the esophagus. Now what is the most important time when this reflux occurs is called TLESERs, that is transient relaxation of the lower esophageal sphincter. They occurs for more than 10 milliseconds, and this is the time during which the maximum reflux occur in patients with reflux disease. So in general, whenever there is a disruption of this reflux barriers, there is decrease in the tone of the LES, there is hiatus hernia, which also affects the anatomy at the lower esophageal sphincter, and ultimately it leads to reflux and thereby the reflux disease. Broadly, we can classify the gastroesophageal reflux disease into either a disease with erosions and breaks on endoscopy, that is called reflux esophagitis. Second thing is the NERD, that is non-erosive reflux disease. So again, more commonly the patients have non-erosive reflux, and there are no erosions when we do endoscopies. Now if we talk about endoscopy, then on endoscopy we have a very commonly used classification system called as Los Angeles classification, which further grades the damage of the esophagus into grade A, B, C and D depending upon the length of mucosa involved and the breaks. So it is this system has great prognostic value. Now coming to the risk factors, that already I talked about hiatus hernia, how it changes the LES sphincter mechanisms. Obesity is a very common thing today, and there is pandemic throughout the world. Because of this obesity and the overweight condition, a lot of acid is going into the esophagus because of increased intra-abdominal pressure. certain food products like fatty food and the alcohol and smoking, these all things, they reduces the LES tone and increases the reflux activity. The H. pylori infection, when it affects the typically the antrum of the stomach, that means enteral predominant gastritis. There is more production of acid and more refluxate. Similarly, there are genetic factors and the pregnancy, because there also intra-abdominal pressure increases. Besides these risk factors, there are a lot of aggravating factors like chocolate, caffeine, intake of acidic and spicy food, carbonated drinks, cold drinks, and certain drugs which affects the tone of lower esophageal sphincter like NSAIDs, calcium channel blockers, anticholinergics, and drugs which causes damage of the esophageal mucosa like the bisphosphonates. Coming to the after the pathophysiology, something about the symptoms and the diagnosis. So patients typically presents with heartburn, regurgitation, and the water breath, that is the salivation which is increased, and there is feeling of lot of water coming into mouth which is sour and salty. These patients may have atypical symptoms like nausea, belching, pain, vomiting, and other atypical symptoms which have been linked with reflux are respiratory symptoms, some ENT symptoms like hoarseness of voice, globus sensation, and some nocturnal awakenings and nightmares. A very important thing to understand is this diagram, which is showing the overlap between some common illnesses like the gastroesophageal reflux disease, peptic ulcer, gastritis, dyspepsia, and gastroparesis. So sometimes we find that patient has a single disease, but in our clinical practice, most of the times we found that there is overlap between all these groups of conditions. So we have to identify them and then treat accordingly. If the reflux remains for a long period of time, then it leads to complications like esophagitis, which is classified into LA grade A to D. There is intestinal metaplasia in the lower esophagus labeled as Barrett's esophagus, which later on develop into adenocarcinoma if left untreated. And bleeding, again esophageal ulcers that occurs because of reflux are one of the very common cause of occurrence of GI bleed. So patients may have a symptom and their common presentations, or may come with atypical presentation. The diagnosis is clinical. If we have a patient who is troubled by reflux, have heartburn, have regurgitation, it is called gastroesophageal reflux disease. So if we have these symptoms twice a week or more than that, it is GERD. We have to confirm it. We need endoscopy to rule out other diseases, and in research conditions a 24-hour pH metry with the impedance monitoring to label the disease. Another way is we can start the patient on empirical PPI, and we can give a good amount, good dose for nearly 8 weeks period, and more than 50% reduction in symptoms are there within 2 weeks. If that symptom is not responding, then you have to either add prokinetics or you have to think of some alternate diagnosis. Lastly, I'll just go to the investigations which are sometimes needed in these patients besides the clinical aspects, which includes the pH metry, that is again investigation for research purposes. Endoscopy has to be done all the time in order to rule out any other cause for the symptom of the patients, as well as we have to rule out NERD from the GERD. Common diseases have to be thought of, and eosinophilic esophagitis should also be ruled out. Barium is no more done commonly because of coming of endoscopy, but if these patients with GERD have dysphagia, we should do a good barium swallow and rule out diseases like achalasia cardia and the hiatus hernia. Manometry is the thing whenever the patient have GERD and also have some dysphagia. So the diseases like achalasia and scleroderma needs to be ruled out. So with this I'll end my presentation, which has mainly dealt with the mechanism to prevent GERD, the pathophysiology of this disease, and how to diagnose it and how to investigate these patients. Thank you.